I'm Emily Wilson, a 32-year-old graphic designer living in Chicago. I work from home for the marketing firm Smith & Co., where my husband, Mike, also works as a senior art director. We're planning our summer wedding at a small vineyard in Michigan. Our friends, Rachel and Matt, are serving as our maid of honor and best man, respectively. I drive a 2015 Honda Civic Hybrid, which I named Bertha, and usually park at the 43rd Street Red Line station when commuting to work. It's a habit I've developed over the years, and one that's become so ingrained that I often forget I'm doing it. Yesterday, on my way home from the grocery store at 6:45 p.m., I stopped for gas at the Exxon station on Lakeshore Drive. As I was pumping fuel, a stranger handed me an envelope with no note or explanation. Inside, there were 6 Polaroid photos of me from different times in my life, times I don't remember. I stared at the Polaroid photos in my hand, trying to reconcile the girl in them with the life I remembered living. The first photo showed me in a yellow sundress, standing on a beach I didn't recognize, holding a pink inflatable flamingo. The second photo was taken in a crowded nightclub with flashing lights and a fog machine making it hard to make out my features. The third photo was from a small town main street, with a cornfield behind me and a faded smile on my face. The fourth photo showed me riding a bike down a sidewalk, wearing a helmet that looked too big for my head. The fifth photo was from a kitchen table, with a plate of cookies in front of me and a cheerful happy birthday banner above the plate. The sixth photo was taken at a small airport, with a plane's door open behind me and a boarding pass clutched in my hand. None of these places or faces looked familiar to me. But the part that really got under my skin was the coffee cup in the fourth photo. It was from the Daily Grind coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, where I had never set foot in my life. I stared at the Polaroid photos in my hand, trying to reconcile the girl in them with the life I remembered living. The first photo showed me in a yellow sundress, standing on a beach I didn't recognize, holding a pink inflatable flamingo. I checked my mental calendar and couldn't pinpoint when or where I might have taken such a picture. The second photo was taken in a crowded nightclub, with flashing lights and a fog machine making it hard to make out my features. I didn't recognize the crowd or the decor. The third photo showed me riding a bike down a sidewalk, wearing a helmet that looked too big for my head. The bike itself looked unfamiliar, and I wondered if I'd ever owned one like it. The fourth photo was from a kitchen table, with a plate of cookies in front of me and a cheerful, happy birthday banner above the plate. I didn't remember the birthday or the cake. The fifth photo was taken at a small airport, with a plane's door open behind me and a boarding pass clutched in my hand. I checked my travel history, but nothing matched. The sixth photo was a close-up of me, smiling and holding a coffee cup from the Daily Grind coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. I'd never set foot in that shop in my life. I started keeping a list of the details I wanted to investigate further. I wrote down every distinctive feature and date from each photo. I wondered if there was a connection between the girl in the photos and the person I thought I was. I checked my phone for any security footage from the areas shown in the photos, but nothing matched. I decided to check my credit card statements and online purchases to see if I'd ever bought anything related to the photos. I started going through my receipts and found a purchase of a pink inflatable flamingo from an online store I'd never used before. The date on the receipt was the same as the first photo. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I decided to check with Rachel and Matt, my friends who were supposed to be our maid of honor and best man, respectively. I stared at the Polaroids, my mind reeling with the faces and places I didn't remember. And then I saw it. A faint tattoo on my wrist in the sixth photo, the same exact tattoo I have on my left wrist right now. I stared at the Polaroids, my mind racing with the faces and places I didn't remember. The faint tattoo on my wrist in the sixth photo kept nagging at me. I looked down at my left wrist, and it was indeed there, a small, blue star on the inner side. But that wasn't what unsettled me most. It was the familiarity of the birthday banner in the fourth photo, the one from the kitchen table. I suddenly remembered being in a similar kitchen, surrounded by cake and candles, but it wasn't a birthday celebration. It was a family gathering, and my mother was there, holding me as a child. The memory was fuzzy, but the setting seemed to match the photo's details. I recalled the smell of fresh, baked cookies and the sound of laughter. But there was something off. The people in the photo didn't seem to be laughing. They looked anxious. And then it hit me. The birthday banner wasn't for a birthday. It was for a christening. My christening. The one my mother had told me was a family-only event, but I'd never questioned her about it. Now, the Polaroids made sense. They weren't from different times in my life. They were all from the same time, the time before my memories began. The stranger who handed me the envelope must have been someone from that life. I called the police and reported the incident, and they immediately took me to a safe house for questioning. The photos were sent to forensic experts, who confirmed that they were indeed taken on different dates, but all within a narrow time frame. I was in shock, but I knew I had to stay focused. I started digging into my past, talking to friends and family members, trying to piece together what might have happened. Rachel and Matt were incredibly supportive, and their reactions were eerily similar to the expressions on my mother's face in the christening photo. It took weeks, but eventually, The police pieced together a timeline of events that explained everything. I discovered that I had indeed been living a dual life, with memories implanted by someone who wanted to control me. The stranger who handed me the envelope was a former acquaintance of my mother's, who had been involved in some shady dealings. He had been manipulating my memories for years, trying to keep me in line. I'm still trying to process the fallout from my former employee, Alex, going public with a scathing accusation that I bullied them during their time at our marketing firm. It's been 3 weeks since the story broke, and my inbox is flooded with concerned messages from friends, family, and even some of my clients. My husband, Ryan, has been trying to keep me grounded, but I can tell he's worried too. We had dinner at the Applebee's in our neighborhood last Friday night, and I spilled ketchup on my new white shirt from last year's birthday gift. The waitress, Rachel, brought me a spare set of napkins and apologized profusely. It was one of those moments that usually wouldn't have stood out, but now feels like a tiny warning sign. Alex claimed that I created a toxic work environment, and that they'd been forced to quit after 6 months on the job. They even went so far as to say that I'd sabotaged their chances with our biggest client. But here's the thing, I have emails and messages from Alex that suggest they were the ones spreading rumors about me online, and even going so far as to hack into my company email account to send out damaging messages. I should have known something was off when I saw them trying to improve our social media presence by posting cryptic, overly dramatic quotes on Twitter. Now, as I'm sifting through the wreckage of my reputation, I'm starting to wonder what other secrets Alex might be hiding. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and I was browsing through my email inbox while sipping on a pumpkin spice light from the Starbucks drive-thru at 8:30 a.m. I had been trying to keep up with the damage control since Alex's accusations went public, but it was hard to focus on anything else. That's when I saw an email in my inbox from our company's IT department, informing me that someone had tried to reset my login credentials to the mainframe server overnight. The password reset request came from a browser with an unfamiliar username, Workhorse2000, and an IP address that didn't match any of our office locations. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I clicked on the message thread, which showed a series of cryptic exchanges between Alex and one of our IT staff members, Rachel, about some issues with our internal firewall. I called Rachel at her desk phone, and she seemed evasive over the line, which only added to my growing unease. I started keeping a list of the discrepancies I noticed in Alex's accusations and the subsequent investigation. It was a spreadsheet on my laptop, with columns for date, time, and description of each incident. The first entry was about the Applebee's dinner last Friday, where the waitress, Rachel, brought me extra napkins. I added it because, in hindsight, it seemed like an unusual gesture, but at the time, it was just a small kindness. The next day, I received an email from our company's IT department about the attempted login reset to my mainframe server account. The password reset request came from a browser with an unfamiliar username and IP address that didn't match any of our office locations. I called Rachel from IT, but she seemed evasive over the phone. On Wednesday, I went through the emails between Alex and one of our IT staff members, Rachel, about some issues with our internal firewall. The exchange was cryptic, but it seemed like they were discussing a security breach or perhaps even a deliberate sabotage. I added a note to my spreadsheet, security breach. Was Alex trying to cover their tracks? That evening, I received a call from our company's CEO asking for an update on the situation. I told him about the email exchange and the attempted login reset. He assured me that we would investigate thoroughly and get to the bottom of it. On Thursday, I went through my company's security footage from the past week. I was looking for any signs of tampering or unusual activity. The footage showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual comings and goings of employees. But one thing caught my eye: the camera installed near the front door had been switched with a different model. I remembered installing the original camera myself, but I couldn't recall changing it. I added another entry to my spreadsheet: camera swapped. Was Alex trying to cover their tracks? On Friday, I received an email from a former colleague of Alex's, who claimed that they had been spreading rumors about me online and hacking into my company email account. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking, as I saw Alex's face on the security camera near the front door. But that wasn't the most shocking part. It was the timestamp 9:45 p.m. on the night of the Applebee's dinner, when they claimed I bullied them. The timestamp on the security camera near the front door, 9:45 p.m. on the night of the Applebee's dinner, finally made sense. I remembered seeing Alex sitting at the bar that night, sipping on a whiskey on the rocks. They had been alone. But I recalled noticing them fiddling with their phone, tapping away at the screen. The bartender had even asked them if they were having trouble finding something online. I replayed the conversation in my head, and it struck me that Alex had been trying to erase evidence of their own actions. But what was even more disturbing was what happened next. The camera caught a glimpse of Alex's phone on the bar, and for a brief moment, I saw a notification pop up. You've reached your 50th login to the company email account in the past hour. That's when it clicked: Alex had been using my account to spread rumors about me online. They had been trying to cover their tracks, but in doing so, they had created a trail of breadcrumbs that I was now following. The email from the IT department about the attempted login reset made sense now too. Rachel, the IT staff member who seemed evasive over the phone, had actually been trying to help me catch Alex in the act. She had sent me an encrypted message with the details of the login attempt, but it got lost in my inbox amidst all the chaos. I stood outside the small conference room, waiting for the CEO's call to discuss the findings of the investigation. The air was thick with tension as I replayed the security footage in my mind, seeing Alex's face on the camera near the front door that night at Applebee's. The timestamp finally made sense. Alex had been trying to cover their tracks, but in doing so, they had created a trail of breadcrumbs that I was now following. The IT department's email about the attempted login reset made sense too. Rachel had been trying to help me catch Alex in the act. The CEO walked out, flanked by 2 lawyers, and handed me a folder with the company's findings. Alex is being charged with corporate espionage and identity theft, he said, his voice firm. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I processed the news. The CEO continued, "We'll be conducting a thorough review of our security protocols to prevent this kind of breach in the future." As I walked out of the conference room, I couldn't help but think about the Applebee's dinner, and how Rachel had brought me those extra napkins. It was a small kindness that had ultimately led to the unraveling of Alex's scheme. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of closure and vindication. I'm a 27-year-old marketing specialist living with my husband Alex in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs of Denver. We bought our place through Redfin in May, and it's been a year since we've unpacked boxes from IKEA. My husband Alex is a software engineer at Oracle, and he drives a 2015 Honda Civic Hybrid to work every day. I commute to downtown Denver on the bus, which leaves our stop at 7:45 a.m. sharp. It's a 30-minute ride, during which I usually scroll through Twitter or listen to NPR podcasts. The other day, while running errands at Target, I stumbled upon a flyer for a free photography exhibit at the local art museum. I hadn't been there since my senior year of high school, when I won first prize in the student art competition with a self-portrait taken by a friend who's now a professional photographer. As I was about to grab a cart, a stranger approached me and said, "You're Emily Wilson, aren't you?" I told him I wasn't, and he replied, "No, it can't be a coincidence." He described my childhood home, our neighborhood, and even some of the quirks of my high school years. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I should have asked him more questions. The stranger's words sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to brush it off as a weird coincidence. I asked him how he knew me, and he replied that he had been watching me for years. He said he had seen me walking my husband Alex home from the bus stop on Tuesdays at 40:45 p.m., and that we always stopped at the Starbucks on the corner for coffee. He even mentioned our favorite breakfast spot, Snooze, where I order the same avocado toast every Saturday mornings. I remembered that particular detail because I had mentioned it to Alex last week, and he had laughed and said I was obsessed with that place. The stranger's knowledge of my daily routine was unsettling, but I tried to convince myself it was just a clever guess. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made me feel like I was staring into a mirror. As I walked home from the bus stop on Tuesday at 40:45 p.m., I noticed that Alex had changed his usual route, taking a detour through the park instead of cutting through the alley. He told me later that he was just trying out a new shortcut, but I remembered that he had mentioned feeling tired of the same old routine. I started keeping a list. A few days later, I saw him arguing with someone on the phone while walking down the street. The person on the other end seemed to be getting agitated, and Alex finally slammed down the receiver. He said it was just a wrong number, but I noticed that he had quickly changed his phone's ringtone to something different. I began to pay closer attention to our daily routine, trying to see if anything else was out of place. I started writing down every detail in a small notebook I kept on my desk. On the 3rd day of this new habit, I discovered that our usual coffee mug was missing from the cupboard. I asked Alex about it, and he claimed he must have left it at the office. But when I checked his cubicle, it was right there, with a used coffee filter stuck in its rim. I also started observing our neighbors more closely, wondering if anyone else might be noticing strange occurrences too. Mrs. Lee Johnson from next door mentioned that her cat had gone missing last week, and she suspected one of the neighborhood raccoons might have taken it. But what really caught my attention was when she mentioned that a suspicious person had been seen lurking around the apartment complex at night. The description sounded like it could be our mysterious stranger. The more I dug, the more I found. I discovered that our favorite breakfast spot, Snooze, had a new employee with a striking resemblance to the stranger. When I asked him about his name, he told me it was Alex. And when I asked for his last name, he said Brown. But when I checked the online menu at the restaurant, their Alex Brown was actually a seasonal worker who started just last month. I decided to take a closer look at our apartment security footage. I rewound the security footage, but what caught my eye was the figure standing just behind me in the corner of the frame, a figure that didn't exist when I reviewed the same feed earlier. Its face was obscured, but its presence made every hair on my body stand on end, and then it vanished. The figure on the security footage, the one that didn't exist before, was my husband, Alex. He was the one who had been watching me, following our routine, and manipulating situations to seem like a coincidence. The stranger who approached me at Target was his alter ego, created to make it seem like I was being stalked by someone else. But it was all just a clever ruse to cover up his own secrets. The new employee at Snooze, Alex Brown, was also my husband, using a different identity to gather information about our daily life. I remembered the way he laughed when I mentioned my favorite breakfast spot, and how he changed his phone's ringtone after arguing with someone on the phone. It all made sense now. He was the one who had been altering our routine, making it seem like someone else was watching us. The security footage, the missing coffee mug, the suspicious person lurking around the apartment complex at night, it was all him, trying to keep up the charade. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized that my husband, the person I trusted with my life, had been lying to me for so long. The revelation was crushing, but it also brought a sense of relief, knowing that I was no longer in danger. I called the police and reported everything I had discovered. They took my husband into custody and found evidence of his alter ego, Alex Brown, on the security cameras and at the Snooze restaurants. He confessed to using the ruse to cover up his own secrets and addiction to surveillance. I was given a victim's advocate to help me navigate the process, and I decided to take some time off from work to focus on my own healing. The police told me that my husband would face charges for identity theft, stalking, and conspiracy. As I sat in our empty apartment, going through his belongings and deleting all the evidence of his manipulations, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. I had been living in fear for so long, and now I could finally start to rebuild my life. I thought back to the day he first started changing our routine, and how I had written down every detail in my notebook. It was a small act of self-care, but it had ultimately led me to the truth. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of pride and determination. I grew up in the old Bellevue neighborhood, where everyone knew each other's names and kids rode bikes until dark. My mom still lives in our childhood home on Elm Street, a 25-year-old two-story colonial with a yellow porch and a rusty mailbox from the American Eagle Company. I'm the youngest of 3, and my parents always joked that they'd have more kids if they could afford it. My sister is a nurse at Mercy Hospital, where she met her husband, a doctor in his first year of residency. They got engaged last summer in June on a hot day at the county fair. My mom still talks about the time I accidentally locked myself out of the house when I was 10, and she had to let herself in through the kitchen window. It happened again 2 years ago, and this time I realized too late that my apartment's back door was slightly ajar, like someone had been in recently. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I should have kept checking the lock. I'd been going to the same gym for 3 years, and on that particular Tuesday evening, I noticed something off when I grabbed my water bottle from the fridge. It was a brand new Nalgene Triton bottle, one I had never seen before, and it had my name printed on the side in Sharpie. I distinctly remembered buying my old Nalgene at the Outdoor Gear Exchange store on Elm Street last year, and this new one was identical except for the color. It was a shade darker than my usual purple. I thought maybe someone had lent it to me, but I couldn't recall anyone borrowing my gym bag in recent memory. My fiancé, Alex, had been working late shifts at the hospital for a few weeks, and I usually met him at the diner on Main Street after my 7 p.m. Zumba class on Tuesdays, but last week he'd canceled at the last minute, saying something about a patient's family crisis. I shrugged it off as a minor inconvenience, but this new water bottle thing was bugging me. It seemed like someone had been in my gym bag recently. I started going to the gym more regularly, trying to stay active despite my increasingly busy schedule as a freelance writer. On Tuesdays, I'd meet Alex at the diner on Main Street after my 7 p.m. Zumba class, but last week he'd canceled at the last minute, saying something about a patient's family crisis. I shrugged it off as a minor inconvenience, but this new water bottle thing was bugging me. It seemed like someone had been in my gym bag recently. I began to pay closer attention to my surroundings, taking note of every small detail. The brand new Nalgene Triton bottle still bothered me, so I decided to do some research. I checked the Outdoor Gear Exchange store on Elm Street, where I'd bought my old Nalgene last year, but they didn't have any record of selling a new one with my name on it. I also checked online marketplaces and social media, but nothing turned up. I continued to investigate, this time focusing on the gym itself. I spoke to the staff and asked if anyone had seen anything suspicious, but they seemed tight-lipped about it. One of the trainers mentioned that there had been some recent issues with broken equipment and missing personal items, but nothing that seemed directly related to my water bottle. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences, and it was starting to look like a pattern. The gym's security cameras didn't seem to be working properly, and I found a discrepancy in their records. According to the log, someone had entered the gym at 9 p.m. on the night before, but there was no video footage of them. I decided to take matters into my own hands and set up a hidden camera near the front door. Alex thought I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. For 5 nights, The camera captured nothing but empty corridors and occasional late-night visitors, but on the sixth night, I saw a figure in a bathrobe lingering around the laundry room. The image was grainy, but I could make out some details. The person was wearing a pair of slippers with a distinctive logo that I'd never seen before. It looked like a mix between a tennis shoe and a gardening clog. I also noticed that they seemed to be holding something in their hand, but it was too far away to see clearly. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I watched the figure disappear into the laundry room. Something was going on at the gym, and I was starting to piece together the evidence. But what was the purpose behind all these strange occurrences? And who was this mysterious figure in the bathrobe? I reviewed the footage from the hidden camera, my heart racing as I saw the figure in the bathrobe enter the laundry room again. This time, they carried something in their hand. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, and tied with a length of old-fashioned twine. I looked closer at the grainy image from the hidden camera, and my heart sank as I realized who the figure in the bathrobe was: Alex, my fiancé. But it wasn't just his presence that sent a chill down my spine, it was what he was holding in his hand. The brown paper package tied with twine looked eerily similar to a package I had seen before, one that I had tried to push to the back of my mind. I remembered the night Alex had canceled our plans at the last minute, saying something about a patient's family crisis. I had thought it was just a convenient excuse to get out of our dinner date, but now I realized he must have been sneaking into the gym to access the laundry room. The same laundry room where I had seen him lingering around on multiple occasions. I replayed all the moments when Alex seemed evasive or distant in my mind, and it made sense now. He was the one who had been secretly conducting experiments on the gym's laundry equipment. The Nalgene Triton bottle with my name on it was a plant, designed to make me suspicious of the gym staff. I couldn't believe I had trusted him for so long. The package in his hand, it was a small piece of evidence he must have been collecting. Evidence of what? I didn't want to know. I felt a mix of emotions as I watched the police take Alex away in handcuffs. Shock, betrayal, and anger fought for dominance. But ultimately, I chose to focus on the sense of relief that washed over me. I knew I had been living in a bubble, oblivious to the secrets Alex had been keeping. The truth was both disturbing and liberating. I was finally free from the toxic relationships. The police investigation revealed that Alex had indeed been conducting twisted experiments on the gym's laundry equipment, using the gym as a covert laboratory. The package he had been collecting contained DNA samples from the equipment, which he planned to use for further research. The authorities charged him with multiple counts of animal cruelty and reckless endangerment. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to heal and move forward. I started therapy, focusing on rebuilding my self-esteem and learning to trust others again. As I looked back on the experience, I realized that the strange occurrences at the gym had been a wake-up call, a chance for me to confront the darkness that had been lurking beneath the surface of my life. I was grateful for the opportunity to start new, to rediscover myself, and to find solace in the knowledge that I was no longer trapped in a relationship with someone who would harm animals for his twisted research. I'd been working 2 jobs to make ends meet in our small town of Oakdale, where everyone knew everyone's business. My family had a small restaurant on Main Street, and I was the one who usually handled the finances. My parents, John and Mary, had always been tight with money, and I'd grown up learning to stretch every dollar. They drove an old Toyota Corolla, a 20-year-old model that John had bought used in 1999. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on Elm Street, within walking distance of the restaurant. My partner, Alex, was a freelance writer who helped with the restaurant's social media and occasionally covered a shift or two. He'd been trying to get me to invest in one of his business ideas for months, but I was skeptical. One evening, after closing up the restaurant, I came home to find that someone had broken into our house through an unlocked window. My laptop and wallet were stolen, and a small amount of cash was missing from my purse. I should have been more careful, but I had no idea what was coming. I'd been tracking the restaurant's finances closely, as usual, and I noticed that one of our suppliers, a local food distributor called Oakdale Provisions, had delivered a large shipment of ground beef to us on Wednesday afternoon. Just a few days ago. Their logo on the invoice seemed slightly different from the usual template, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As I was reviewing the receipts from our lunch service on Thursday, I stumbled upon a discrepancy. One of our usual regulars, a middle-aged woman who always sat at table 17, had paid with her credit card, which she usually did. But this time the receipt had a handwritten note. Use for next week's specials only. I didn't think much of it at first, but now that I looked back, it seemed off. The handwriting was not Alex's, and I couldn't remember ever seeing it before. I pushed the thought aside, thinking I was just being paranoid. But as I filed the receipts away, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart skip a beat. A small, crumpled-up receipt from Oakdale Provisions, dated last Friday, with an order for 20 pounds of ground beef, for personal use only. I'd been reviewing the restaurant's financials for weeks, trying to pinpoint where the discrepancies were coming from. One day, while I was on a break, Alex asked me to pick up a few things from the store. I drove to the Oakdale grocery on Main Street and grabbed a pack of coffee filters, some fresh fruit, and a jar of mayonnaise. As I was checking out, I noticed the cashier, a friendly woman named Karen, seemed hesitant to hand me my change. She said something about needing to call her manager. I shrugged it off and headed home. The next day, while I was prepping for the lunch service, I found a small, torn piece of paper on the floor near the walk-in fridge. It had a partial receipt from Oakdale Provisions on it, but the date and time stamps were different from our usual orders. I put it in my apron pocket to show Alex later. That evening, while we were closing up, I noticed that our bank statement had arrived in the mail. But when I opened the envelope, there was only a notice saying our account had been overdrawn by a significant amount. I asked Alex if he'd seen anything unusual on the receipts from the previous night, but he just shook his head. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, I saw that our neighbor, Mr. Johnson, was watching me from across the street. He's an old man who usually keeps to himself, but something about his expression made me feel uneasy. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just concerned about the recent break-ins in the area. As the day went on, I started to notice more and more discrepancies. A small cash register in the back of the restaurant had been moved from its usual spot. The password for our online ordering system had changed, but neither Alex nor I could remember setting a new one. And when I reviewed the security footage from the previous night, I saw that someone had entered the restaurant through a side door around 10 p.m., but there was no record of anyone leaving. I started keeping a list of all these events, writing down every detail and trying to connect the dots. I stared at the security footage, my eyes fixed on the figure in the shadows, until I realized it wasn't just their face that was familiar, it was their entire body. And the way they moved with a quiet confidence that sent a chill down my spine. I stared at the security footage, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. And then it hit me, the figure in the shadows, the one who had entered the restaurant through the side door around 10 p.m., wasn't a stranger at all. It was Alex, my partner, my friend, but not the Alex I thought I knew. The Alex I thought I knew was the one who had been trying to get me to invest in his business ideas, the one who had been writing articles about entrepreneurship and success. But the Alex on the security footage was different. He was nervous, fidgety, like he was hiding something. And then it clicked, the Oakdale Provisions receipts, the discrepancy in the finances, the strange behavior at the grocery store, it all made sense now. Alex had been using our restaurant's money to fund his own business ventures. And when I started to investigate, he panicked and tried to cover his tracks. But why? Why would someone I trusted, someone I loved, do something like that? The answer was in the details, the handwritten note on the receipt from Oakdale Provisions, the partial date stamp on the torn paper. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized that Alex had been using me, manipulating me to get what he wanted. And I had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. The restaurant's security system had captured more than just a break. It had captured the betrayal of someone I trusted. I decided to confront Alex about my discovery, and we had a tense conversation in the restaurant's office. He broke down and confessed to embezzling funds from our business to support his own failing startup. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and betrayal, but I tried to remain calm and focused on finding a solution. We contacted the police, and Alex was charged with grand larceny. The restaurant's security system was upgraded, and we implemented new financial controls to prevent similar incidents. As I look back on the experience, I realized that I had been so caught up in trusting Alex that I had ignored warning signs. But I also learned that sometimes it takes a fall to appreciate the value of loyalty and integrity. I reflected on the handwritten note on the receipt from Oakdale Provisions, which now seemed like a cry for help. I made a mental note to be more vigilant and to surround myself with people who shared my values. The ordeal had been difficult, but I felt a sense of closure and relief that justice was served. As I closed the restaurant that night, I felt a quiet sense of peace wash over me, knowing that I had emerged stronger and wiser from the experience. I've been working as an event coordinator for our company, Sunny Events, for 3 years now. My boss, Rachel, has always been great to work with. She's the one who hired me, after all. We often grab coffee together at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf in the mornings before a big event. My husband, Alex, and I have been married for 5 years, and we try to plan our events so that I can be home for dinner with him most nights. He's a software engineer at a company downtown, and he commutes from our condo in the financial district. Last year, I started noticing that our CEO, Tom, was acting strange. He'd often disappear during meetings, and when he came back, he seemed distracted. It was like he had something on his mind, but he wouldn't say what it was. Just last week, I saw him arguing with one of our employees in the parking lot after work. He usually parks his silver Honda Civic in spot C12, and I've seen him yell at someone from that car before, but this time it seemed different. Whatever was bothering him, I could tell it was serious. And now, I'm starting to wonder if it has anything to do with our company's recent downturn. I was walking out of the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf on Friday afternoon, sipping on a latte and checking my phone for any new event updates. That's when I saw Rachel, our CEO, slipping out the back door with a young woman in a sunny events shirt. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they were just grabbing a meeting in private. But then I saw them get into Tom's silver Honda Civic, which was parked in spot C12, and drive off towards the highway. I checked my watch. It was 2:47 p.m. I've worked with Rachel for 3 years, and I've never seen her get into a car with anyone else from the office before. This seemed different. I tried to brush it off as a routine meeting or errand, but something about the way they were acting didn't feel right. It was like they were trying to keep something hidden. I started keeping a list of the strange occurrences at Sunny events. At first, it was just small things. Tom's usual car was missing from its spot in the parking lot, and his silver Honda Civic was seen parked elsewhere on campus. I mentioned it to Rachel during our weekly coffee break, but she brushed it off as a coincidence. The next day, I saw one of our employees, Emily, walking out of Tom's office with a box of files. She claimed it was for a new project. But I knew that wasn't true. We'd been working on the same event schedule for months. I added her name to my list. The following week, I received an email from the company's accounting department stating that Tom had authorized a transfer of funds to an external account. I didn't recognize the bank name or account holder, and when I asked our accountant, she seemed evasive. I added the bank name to my list. On Monday afternoon, I saw Rachel and another woman, whom I later learned was named Sarah, meeting in private during a break between events. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing around the room nervously. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I remembered the argument I'd seen Tom having with Emily in the parking lot. I added their names to my list. I started paying closer attention to our CEO's schedule, and I noticed that he was attending meetings at unusual hours, 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, 10 a.m. on a Sunday. I checked the company calendar and saw that they were all scheduled for confidential discussions. I added the meeting times to my list. One evening, while reviewing the company's financial records, I discovered that Tom had been making large withdrawals from our firm's bank account over the past few months. The amounts were substantial, and when I asked our accountant about them, she hinted that it was all part of a business strategy. I wasn't buying it. I added the withdrawal amounts to my list. I started to feel like I was in way over my head, but I knew I had to keep digging. I reviewed the security footage from that Friday afternoon. Rachel and Tom's car sped away down the highway. But what caught my attention was the license plate number. It belonged to my husband's old vehicle, which he'd sold 6 months ago. As I watched the security footage, my mind racing with possibilities, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The license plate number on Tom's car matched my husband's old vehicle, but I had been so certain he had sold it 6 months ago. I recalled the conversation we had about selling it to a friend, and how he had even shown me the sale documents on his phone. But what if it wasn't a coincidence? What if he had sold it to someone, or something else? I decided to investigate further, and what I found chilled me to the bone. A private investigator I had hired through a recommendation from a colleague at Sunny Events dug up some information that made my blood run cold. It turned out that Tom's silver Honda Civic was indeed the same car that my husband had sold, but it wasn't the only connection. The PI discovered that Tom had been using the vehicle as part of his secret business plan. He had been running his new company's operations from within our own firm, using our resources and employees to build his rival business. And I had unknowingly played right into his hands. The confidential meetings I had seen him having were all about lining up his new business with investors, and the large withdrawals from our account were just a small part of his scheme to finance his new venture. But what really took my breath away was the identity of the young woman in the T-shirt. Rachel, my supposed friend and colleague, was not only working with Tom but had also been embezzling funds for her own gain. I felt betrayed, but also a sense of relief that the mystery was finally solved. I reported Tom's scheme to the authorities, and he was arrested on the spot for embezzlement and corporate theft. Rachel, my colleague, was also charged with embezzlement and conspiracy. The investigation revealed that she had been working with Tom behind our backs, using company resources and funds to fuel their new business venture. I cooperated fully with the authorities, providing them with all the evidence I had gathered. The financial records, security footage, and eyewitness accounts all pointed to a large-scale conspiracy. Tom's new business was shut down, and both he and Rachel were fired from Sunny Events. In the aftermath, our company conducted an internal audit, and several more employees were found to be involved in various levels of Tom's scheme. I was praised for my diligence and whistleblowing skills, but the real reward was seeing justice served and our company's integrity restored. As I reflected on the experience, I realized that my husband's old car had been a red flag all along. It was a small detail that I had brushed off initially, but it ultimately led me to the truth. In the end, I learned that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for redemption and accountability. I'm Emily, and I inherited my uncle's storage unit when he passed away in January. It was a 10x 10-foot space with a metal door and a rusted lock that hadn't been opened in years. The unit was located at big box storage on the outskirts of town, near the highway. My uncle used to park his old Honda Civic CR-V there when he went on business trips, every few months. I remember him telling me that he was a traveling salesman for a company called Global Tech, and that he was always on the road. But as I began to sort through the unit, I found newspaper clippings from the local paper, dated from 2015 to 2020 with headlines like "Man Arrested for Burglary" and "Woman Accused of Grand Theft." They all seemed to be from different cities across the country. But what caught my attention was that every article matched the exact dates of my uncle's business trips. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered if there was more to my uncle's story than I had ever imagined. I should have kept searching through those boxes. I continued searching through the boxes and found a stack of old phone bills from different cities, each one dated to coincide with my uncle's business trips. One bill in percent, it was from a payphone at a 7-Eleven on 5th Street in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The date was August 15, 2018, and the amount due was $23,552. I remember my uncle telling me that he always paid his phone bills online, but this one was printed out with a handwritten signature and a faded 7-Eleven logo on the top left corner. I wondered if my uncle had ever actually used that payphone or if someone else had paid the bill for him. I made a mental note to look into the 7-Eleven security footage for that date, but as I turned back to the boxes, I noticed something else, a small notebook with a familiar logo on the cover. It was a 20-year-old Dairy Queen loyalty card, and it had my uncle's name and address printed on the back. I continued searching through the boxes and found a stack of old credit card statements from my uncle's Global Tech Visa, each one showing purchases at various convenience stores and gas stations across the country. The dates matched his business trips perfectly, and I started to notice a pattern. Every time he was in a new city, he would purchase a small item from a 7-Eleven or a Circle K, a pack of gum, a Slim Jim, a lottery ticket. It was as if he was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. I found a handwritten receipt from a Taco Bell in Des Moines, Iowa, dated June 10, 2019, the same day my uncle had told me he was attending a sales conference in Chicago. The receipt showed that he had purchased a $2.50 burrito and a $1.99 coffee. I wondered if he had actually eaten the burrito or if someone else had bought it for him. I started keeping a list of the strange purchases and the corresponding dates of my uncle's business trips. The list grew longer with each new discovery: a pack of Skittles from a CVS in Phoenix, Arizona, the 10 scratch-off ticket from a gas station in Portland, Oregon. I started to feel like I was piecing together a puzzle, but I couldn't quite see the big picture. I decided to investigate further and looked up the security footage from the 7-Eleven in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where my uncle's phone bill had been printed out with his signature. The manager of the store was hesitant to release the footage, but after some persistence, he agreed to send me a copy on DVD. I spent hours watching the grainy video, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary, just a steady stream of customers buying lottery tickets and Slim Jims. But then, about an hour into the tape, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure in a bright yellow vest walked into the store at exactly 10:47 p.m. on August 15, 2018, the same date as my uncle's business trip to Albuquerque. The figure was wearing a name tag that read NY, and it seemed to be scanning the shelves with a look of intense focus. I fast-forwarded the security tape to August 15, 2018, and stopped it on a moment I'd missed before. The figure in the bright yellow vest was now facing the camera, and for an instant, its face was clear. It was my uncle, with a look of satisfaction. As I watched the security footage again, I couldn't shake off the feeling that my uncle was in Albuquerque on August 15, 2018. But it wasn't until I received a package from a stranger that the truth began to unravel. Inside, I found a stack of old photographs, each one showing my uncle standing in front of various convenience stores and gas stations across the country. The dates on the photos matched the dates of his business trips, and I noticed a peculiar symbol etched into the corner of each picture, a small hand-drawn logo that looked like a mix of a 7-Eleven and a Dairy Queen logo. It was the same logo that appeared on the Dairy Queen loyalty card I found in the storage unit. Suddenly, it clicked: my uncle wasn't just visiting these places, he was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. The strange purchases on his credit card statements, the exact dates of his business trips. And now, the photographs with the matching logo all pointed to one conclusion: my uncle was a serial store clerk impersonator. He would visit different cities, assume the identity of an existing store clerk, and use their ID and access to commit small-scale thefts and scams. The articles in the newspaper clippings were from his own crimes, committed under various aliases. I felt a mix of emotions, shock, anger, and sadness as I realized that my uncle's business trips were actually a carefully planned scheme to fuel his addiction to small-time crime. The figure in the bright yellow vest on the security footage was him, posing as a store clerk to cover his tracks. The notebook with the Dairy Queen logo was his ID manual, where he kept track of his various aliases and access credentials. The receipt from the Taco Bell in Des Moines, Iowa, wasn't just a purchase, it was a record of his next target. I contacted the authorities, and they launched an investigation into my uncle's activities. The police were able to gather enough evidence to bring him to justice, and he was eventually charged with multiple counts of identity theft, credit card fraud, and check kiting. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison with a recommendation for counseling to address his addiction to small-time crime. As I reflected on the whole experience, I realized that my uncle's behavior was a desperate attempt to cope with his own sense of inadequacy and powerlessness. The storage unit, with all its secrets and lies, had become a symbol of his own self-delusion. I felt a mix of emotions as I watched him being led away in handcuffs: anger, sadness, but also a sense of relief that the truth was finally out. I knew that I would never look at my family's history in the same way again. In the end, it was a sobering reminder that even the people we love can hide secrets behind their masks of normalcy. The storage unit was sold to a new owner, and I made sure to clean out all the remaining boxes and papers, leaving no reminders of my uncle's schemes behind. I still remember the day I met my fiancé, Alex, at the local Starbucks in downtown Portland. He ordered a venti iced caramel macchiato, and we struck up a conversation about our shared love of coffee. I was sipping on a pumpkin spice latte from the same store. As we talked, he mentioned that he had recently received an inheritance from a distant relative and was considering investing in a few high-end cars to celebrate. He showed me his phone, and I recall the gleaming photo of a sleek 2018 Aston Martin DB11 on the screen. Fast forward 6 months, and Alex introduced me to his business partner, Marks, who claimed to be running a lucrative investment scheme. Mark's words dripped with confidence as he presented his plan, which promised astronomical returns on our investments. I remember distinctly that he used a laptop from Best Buy, a 2019 model, to project the charts and graphs he claimed demonstrated the unmatched success of their operation. I trusted Alex, and my friends all seemed to trust him too, so we each handed over our life savings. At the time, it felt like a solid investment in our future together. Little did I know that it would all come crashing down in the most unexpected way. The FBI arrived at our doorstep, their faces stern as they served Alex with a federal indictment for running the largest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history. As I watched him being taken away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but think about how this had unfolded right under my nose. I still had my doubts about Mark's investment scheme, but Alex reassured me that it was legitimate. One thing that caught my attention, however, was the logo on his laptop screensaver, a 2015 model from Best Buy, with a cracked glass plate and a fading Apple sticker on the back. I mentioned it to Alex, but he just chuckled and said it was an old computer they used for research. But what really made me pause was when Mark started talking about their secret client, a wealthy businessman from Manhattan who had invested millions in their scheme. He showed me a photo of the man's 2012 Bentley Continental GT on his phone, and I noticed that the model year was listed as GTC, instead of the correct GT. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, it was the first red flag that something wasn't quite right. Mark had also mentioned something about a private meeting with this client on Thursday evening, but when I asked Alex about it later, he brushed it off as just a minor business discussion. I remember distinctly the logo on Mark's laptop screensaver, a 2015 model from Best Buy, with a cracked glass plate and a fading Apple sticker on the back. At first, I thought it was just an old computer they used for research, but when Mark started talking about their secret client, a wealthy businessman from Manhattan who had invested millions in their scheme, I began to feel uneasy. He showed me a photo of the man's 2012 Bentley Continental GT on his phone, and I noticed that the model year was listed as GTC, instead of the correct GT. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, it was the first red flag that something wasn't quite right. Mark had also mentioned something about a private meeting with this client on Thursday evening, but when I asked Alex about it later, he brushed it off as just a minor business discussion. I started keeping a list of all the inconsistencies I noticed, from the logo on the laptop to the model year of the Bentley. I also made a mental note to look up the name of their secret client and see if I could find any information about him online. I was starting to feel like I had stumbled into something big, but I didn't know what to do with the information. So I decided to do some digging of my own. I began by searching for records of Alex's and Mark's business dealings in the county courthouse, looking for any mention of their company or its clients. I also checked the phone book and online directories for any information about Mark's alleged client from Manhattan. Nothing seemed to match up. I couldn't find any record of the company, and the name of the client didn't appear to be legitimate. I was getting more and more frustrated as the days went by, and I started to feel like I was wasting my time. But then I stumbled upon a small article in the local newspaper about a large Ponzi scheme being investigated by the FBI. As I rummaged through Alex's laptop, a folder named Confidential caught my eye. Inside, a single document was dated March 15th with a timestamp of exactly 30:14 p.m. I double-clicked it, and the screen flickered. The document itself was blank except for one sentence typed in a different font at the very bottom. Package FEN 347 delivered to Unit 3D440B, Manhattan. As I stared at the document on Alex's laptop, my mind racing with questions, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. The sentence typed in a different font at the bottom. Package FEN 347 delivered to Unit 3120B. Manhattan seemed innocuous at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it nagged me. I remembered Mark mentioning a private meeting with their secret client on Thursday evening, and how Alex had brushed it off as just a minor business discussion. But what if that wasn't just a discussion? What if something was actually being delivered to Unit 3420B in Manhattan? I scrolled back through the document, searching for any other clues, and that's when I saw it, a small icon of a New York City skyline in the top left corner of the page. It was the same logo from the photo Mark had shown me earlier, the one with the GTC instead of GT. My heart sank as I realized that the entire time, Alex and Mark had been playing me, using my trust to get closer to their real targets. I scrolled back to the top of the document, where a timestamp caught my eye, 3:14 p.m. on March 15th. I remembered distinctly how Mark had mentioned that they had a private meeting with their client on Thursday evening, and I realized now that it must have been exactly at that time. As I sat in the courtroom watching Alex's face pale as he listened to the verdict, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and a hint of sadness. The FBI had found evidence of their massive Ponzi scheme, hidden inside a safe in Alex's apartment, and the judge had sentenced him to 10 years in prison. The authorities also charged Mark with multiple counts of wire fraud and money laundering. I was one of the lucky ones. I managed to get most of my life savings back, but many others weren't so fortunate. I spent the next few weeks in therapy, processing what I had gone through and working on rebuilding my trust in people. One day, while going through my old notes, I stumbled upon the article about the Bentley Continental GT with the incorrect model year. It was then that I realized how meticulously they had planned their scheme, down to the smallest details. But it was also a reminder of how I had been so blinded by trust that I hadn't seen it coming. I've been married to my husband, Alex, for 5 years now. We're supposed to be celebrating our anniversary today, but I'm standing in the backyard of our own home, staring at a complete stranger holding a smartphone with a photo of us on it. His name is Jamie, and I have no idea how he found us or what he wants. Alex is still inside, oblivious to the bombshell about to drop. I've been feeling trapped in this relationship for a while now, but I never thought it was this bad. The photo on Jamie's phone is of us at the beach in Florida, where we were supposed to spend our honeymoon 2 years ago. Alex canceled the trip at the last minute, citing work, and I didn't push the issue. Now I wish I had demanded answers. We're from Columbus, Ohio, and we drive a 20-year-old Honda Civic that's seen better days. I'm still paying off student loans from community college, while Alex graduated from Ohio State with a business degree. We moved to this house in suburban Grove City after getting married, and the neighbors seem friendly enough. But Jamie's presence has turned everything upside down. I need to know what's going on and why he's here. I should have kept my phone close. I was checking the guest list for our anniversary party, and I noticed that Jamie had RSVP'd. I didn't recognize his name, but I assumed it was a friend of Alex's. As I was scrolling through the names, I saw that he had arrived about an hour ago. I made a mental note to talk to Alex about it, but then I got distracted by the catering order. When I finally got a chance to mingle, I saw Jamie standing near the food table, talking to my mother-in-law, Karen. She was laughing and smiling at something he said, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I excused myself to go refill my drink, and that's when I saw it, Jamie holding his phone with a photo of us on the screen. The photo was taken at a restaurant in downtown Columbus, and I remembered going there for our first date. Alex had said it was a mistake, but now I wasn't so sure. I stared at Jamie's phone in my hand, trying to process the photo on the screen. It was of us at that restaurant in downtown Columbus, where Alex had said it was a mistake to go. But I remembered the evening clearly, the dim lighting, the live music, the way Alex had smiled at me across the table. I had been so caught up in the romance of it all that I hadn't questioned his story. As I stood there, frozen in shock, Jamie started to talk to Alex, who was still oblivious to the situation. They exchanged words, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but I tried to keep my cool. I needed to get to the bottom of this. I started keeping a list in my head: the inconsistencies in Alex's story, the strange behavior of Jamie, the fact that Karen was laughing and smiling at him earlier. I made a mental note to ask her about it later. I excused myself from the party and went to my car, where I had parked my phone on the passenger seat. I quickly scanned through our text messages, looking for any clues. There were several conversations with Jamie, but they were all vague and seemingly innocuous. I couldn't pinpoint anything that would explain why he was at our anniversary party. As I scrolled through our Facebook photos, I noticed something strange. Alex had posted a photo from what was supposed to be our honeymoon in Florida, but it was taken on the day we canceled the trip. The caption read, "Someday we'll make it to the beach." I remembered feeling frustrated and disappointed when he canceled the trip, but I had never pushed the issue. I decided to dig deeper and started searching for any public records of Alex's business dealings. I Googled his company name and found a few articles about him being involved in some shady real estate deals. I made a note to look into it further. As I continued to investigate, I became more and more convinced that something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jamie was hiding something, and that Alex was involved somehow. Just as I was about to confront them both, Karen approached me with a concerned look on her face. "Honey, where have you been?" she asked. "I've been looking all over for you." I hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of what to say next. As I stared at the photo on Jamie's phone, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The table in the background was from our own kitchen, with the same vase my mother-in-law had given us as a wedding gift. And next to the vase, in plain sight, was a newspaper clipping with our wedding announcement. As I stared at the photo on Jamie's phone, I saw the table in the background was from our own kitchen, with the same vase my mother-in-law had given us as a wedding gift. And next to the vase, in plain sight, it was a newspaper clipping with our wedding announcement. It was then that I noticed the small, almost imperceptible nod that Alex gave Jamie before turning back to me. My heart sank as I remembered the countless times Alex had worked late, or had forgotten our plans only to be seen at some upscale restaurant or event with Jamie by his side. The photo of us on what was supposed to be our honeymoon was taken at that same restaurant in downtown Columbus, where Alex had said it was a mistake to go. But I remembered the evening clearly, the dim lighting, the live music, the way Alex had smiled at me across the table. I had been so caught up in the romance of it all that I hadn't questioned his story. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed web of deceit that I had unknowingly played a part in. My eyes locked onto Jamie's, and I saw a faint glimmer of recognition, a hint that he knew the truth. The photo on his phone wasn't just any photo, it was proof of their affair, one that had been going on for years, right under my nose. I called the police, and they arrived quickly to escort Jamie out of the party. Alex's expression changed from smug to worried as he realized the jig was up. I stayed calm, trying to process everything that had happened. As the police took Jamie in for questioning, I walked over to Alex and said, "We need to talk." We went inside, and I showed him the list of inconsistencies I'd compiled. He broke down, confessing to the affair and admitting he'd been using me as a cover for his relationship with Jamie. The police found evidence on his phone that corroborated my story. Alex was charged with bigamy and perjury, and Jamie was charged with identity theft and harassment. I filed for divorce, and we agreed on joint custody of our belongings. In the aftermath, I realized I'd been so focused on trying to make the relationship work that I'd ignored my own intuition. But now I knew better. I donated the old Honda Civic to a local charity and used the settlement money to start my own business. It was a new beginning. As I looked around at the empty house, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The anniversary party had been a turning point, but it wasn't a defining moment. It was just a reminder that I deserved better. I'm still unpacking boxes from my grandmother's estate, trying to make sense of the cryptic maps and notes scattered throughout her files. It's been 3 weeks since she passed away, but it feels like just yesterday we were laughing over dinner at the Cracker Barrel in Gatlinburg. My mom and I had gone through the house room by room, sorting through the decades' worth of memorabilia and trinkets. The maps were tucked away in a drawer marked personal. My grandmother's handwriting always made me think of antique typewriters. One map in particular caught my eye. It showed a series of coordinates and symbols. What looked like an old-fashioned compass rose in the corner. According to the key, these were supposed to be meeting points or something. I couldn't quite decipher the code. I turned it over, searching for more clues, and saw a faint notation in the margin, red maple 14, followed by what looked like a dated June 17, 1985. My grandmother was always a bit of a hippie at heart, but this felt off. Like something was trying to tell me something. I tucked the map back into its drawer, deciding to leave it for now and focus on more pressing matters, like finishing the laundry my mom had started in her kitchen. But as I walked out of the room, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror and felt a shiver run down my spine. I should have kept looking. As I walked back to the laundry room, I noticed a faint scent of cedar lingering in the air. It was the same smell my grandmother used to bring home from her favorite thrift store, the attic in Pigeon Forge. I had forgotten about it until now. But what really caught my attention was the laundry basket with my mom's washing machine. The detergent packet that my mom usually uses was missing, and in its place was a single-tied original scent packet with the cap still sealed. I remembered distinctly seeing the regular detergent on the shelf 2 days ago. Now it was gone? I shook my head, thinking maybe it was just my mom doing some quick laundry. But as I poured myself a glass of iced tea from the Brita pitcher in the kitchen, I noticed something odd. The tea bag had been removed and reinserted with the string facing the opposite direction. This time, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was just a small detail, but it was enough to make me pause. I kept the map with the cryptic coordinates and symbols on my kitchen table, where I would stare at it during every meal. The image of the compass rose kept me company like an old friend. As I washed dishes, I replayed the notation, red maple 14, in my head, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it a code? A password? A warning? I pored over my grandmother's other maps, searching for any connections or clues. The next day, while driving through the Appalachian Mountains, I noticed something peculiar. The GPS on my phone was acting erratically, as if it was being manipulated to reroute me through areas with no cell service. I tried to adjust the settings, but it kept happening. On a hunch, I stopped at a random gas station and asked the attendant if he had seen any unusual patterns in the area's traffic flow. He looked at me warily and said nothing. I started keeping a list of every strange occurrence, From the missing detergent packet to the altered tea bag. The laundry basket was still being used, but now it contained an assortment of items that didn't belong. A faded blue t-shirt with no label, a single glove made of a material I couldn't identify, and a stack of what appeared to be handmade note cards with intricate designs. As I sorted through my grandmother's files, I found a series of cryptic notes referencing Operation Red Maple and Project Elysium. The dates matched the notation on the map. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that these might be more than just coincidences. I spent hours searching online for any information about Operation Red Maple or Project Elysium, but every lead ended in a dead end. It was as if the internet had been scrubbed clean of any relevant data. I began to wonder if I was being watched, if someone was monitoring my searches and covering their tracks. That night, I received an unexpected phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was distorted, but it spoke a single phrase: Red Maple 14 is not what you think. The line went dead before I could respond. I crept into the attic, my flashlight beam dancing across old trunks and boxes. That's when I saw it. A single, dusty CD with my grandmother's name scribbled on the label, Operation Red Maple, was etched in the center in bold red letters. The CD itself was blank. As I stood in the attic, staring at the CD with my grandmother's name on it, a sense of unease crept over me. I had been so focused on deciphering the cryptic messages and codes that I hadn't stopped to consider why my grandmother would have left these clues behind. But now, as I looked closer at the CD, I saw something that made my heart sink. The red letters, Operation Red Maple, were etched into the center of the disc, just like on the map. And next to it, in smaller letters, was a date: June 17, 1985. The same date my grandmother had written on the map. I felt a wave of memories wash over me as I recalled my grandmother's stories about the summer she spent in the Appalachian Mountains, working for a research team studying the effects of high-frequency radiation on the human body. She had always been vague about the specifics, but now I realized that she must have been involved in something much bigger than just a scientific study. The missing detergent packet, the altered tea bag, the strange occurrences in the mountains, it all made sense now. I remembered the phone call from the unknown number, the distorted voice saying, Red Maple 14 is not what you think. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I had been played. The maps, the codes, the cryptic messages, it was all just a ruse to keep me occupied while someone else dug up the truth. I looked down at the CD in my hand, feeling a sense of betrayal and sadness wash over me. My grandmother, the kind-hearted woman who always put others first, had been hiding something from me. Something big. I walked out of the estate, feeling the cool mountain air on my skin as I gazed out at the trees. The cryptic maps and codes still swirled in my mind, but I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I realized that my grandmother had been trying to protect something or someone all along. I called the local authorities and reported what I had found, telling them about the missing detergent packet, the altered tea bag, and the strange occurrences in the mountains. They listened attentively, their eyes narrowing as they pieced together the clues. Together, we uncovered a decades-old cover-up involving government agencies and private corporations. My grandmother's notes and maps were just a small part of a larger web of deceit. As I watched the investigators pack up the evidence, I felt a sense of justice being served. The wrongdoers were finally being held accountable, and my grandmother's legacy was being vindicated. I'm still trying to process the revelation that's been haunting me since I received my grandmother's old recipe book after her passing last week. The worn leather cover creaked as I opened it, releasing a musty smell that transported me back to her kitchen when I was a child. The family heirloom contained recipes that had been passed down through generations, but one entry in particular caught my eye: a recipe for edible gold, allegedly used by the Tsar of Russia to bribe his way into power. My grandmother, a proud Russian immigrant, never mentioned this secret to me or anyone else, and I couldn't help but wonder why. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed that the book was bound with a strange silver thread, a detail my grandmother had always kept hidden. I remember visiting her antique store on Main Street in downtown Oakdale last summer, where she sold vintage jewelry and accessories. One of her employees, a young woman named Sophia, would often help me pick out unique gifts for my friends. Sophia had a fascination with the occult and the supernatural, often sharing tales about the Tsar's supposed powers with me. I should have listened more closely when she spoke about the book's alleged history. As I flipped through the pages of my grandmother's recipe book, I noticed that one of the ingredients listed for the edible gold recipe was a type of 24-karat gold leaf sold exclusively by a local art supply store in downtown Oakdale called the Artisan's Loft. I remembered visiting that store with Sophia last year, where she had purchased a batch of similar gold leaf to use in her own craft projects. I also recalled the specific brand of gold dust mentioned in the recipe, Carat Best, which I had seen advertised on a jewelry-making forum online. I had always been skeptical of such claims, but now I wondered if there was any truth to the Tsar's supposed powers after all. I pulled out my phone to look up the recipe online, but as I scrolled through the search results, I noticed something peculiar: a comment from a user named Golden Girl 80A, who claimed to have made the edible gold using the same carat best dust and 24-karat gold leaf from the artisan's loft. The user had posted a picture of what looked like a delicate golden dessert, but the resolution was too low to make out any details. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered if my grandmother might have been more involved in this secret than I initially thought. I began to review the recipe book's history, poring over the family tree and making a list of all the relatives who had been involved in its creation. My great-great-grandmother, Anastasia, was mentioned as the original owner of the book, but I couldn't find any information about her on my phone or computer. I made a note to visit the local historical society to see if they had any records. Next, I started researching the art supply store, the Artisan's Loft, where Sophia had purchased the gold leaf. I discovered that the store was owned by a man named Max Wellington, who had a reputation for being eccentric and reclusive. I added his name to my list and made a mental note to pay him a visit. The recipe book also mentioned a specific type of cooking oil used in the edible gold recipe, which I couldn't find on any online retailer. I started calling local health food stores, asking if they carried it. One store owner mentioned that it was a specialty item and might be available at a high-end kitchen supply store in the city. I made a reservation to visit the store the next day. As I continued to dig deeper, I started to notice strange inconsistencies in my grandmother's estate plans. She had left her antique store to me, but there was no mention of the recipe book or its contents in her will. I wondered if she had tried to leave a hidden message for me. I decided to look into the history of the silver thread that bound the book, which I suspected might be a clue to its significance. After some research, I discovered that the thread was made from a rare type of silk that was no longer commercially available. I started making calls to antique dealers and collectors, hoping to find someone who might have knowledge about the silk. As I gathered more information, my list of suspects and leads grew. I had not changed the lock on my mailbox in years, but now I wondered if it might be time to do so. As I carefully separated the silver thread from the binding, I noticed that one strand was slightly thicker than the others. Upon closer inspection, I saw that it was woven with an unusual symbol, the exact same mark used by Sophia in her occult tattoos, which she had told me held mystical significance for our family's ancestors. As I carefully examined the silver thread, I noticed that it was indeed woven with an unusual symbol, the same mark used by Sophia in her occult tattoos. Suddenly, it clicked into place. Sophia was my grandmother's illegitimate child, born out of a secret affair with a Russian aristocrat who had been associated with the Tsar's court. My grandmother had kept this a dark family secret for decades, and Sophia had grown up to be a recluse, obsessed with the occult and our family's history. I remembered Sophia's fascination with the book's alleged history and her stories about the Tsar's powers. It was all part of her own desperate attempt to connect with her roots and understand her mysterious lineage. The carat best gold dust and 24-karat gold leaf were not just random ingredients. They were part of a ritualistic practice passed down through our family, one that Sophia had been trying to revive. The edible gold recipe was more than just a recipe. It was a symbol of our family's dark past and Sophia's attempt to reclaim her heritage. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the true extent of my grandmother's involvement in this secret. She had been using the recipe book to conceal a hidden truth, one that would have changed everything if it had come to light. The silver thread, now unbound, seemed to whisper secrets to me, and I knew I had to uncover the rest of our family's dark history. I took a deep breath and dialed the number for the local historical society, asking if they had any records of my great-great-grandmother Anastasia. The librarian's voice on the other end was warm and friendly as she searched through the archives. "Ah, yes," she said finally. "We have a few documents related to Anastasia's family. It seems they were indeed involved in some unusual activities with the Russian aristocracy." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I asked her to send over the files. As I waited for them to arrive, I decided to pay Max Wellington, the owner of the Artisan's Loft, a visit. He answered the door himself, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in my determined expression. "Can I help you?" he asked gruffly. I explained my situation, and after a moment he nodded curtly and invited me inside. As we sat down at his kitchen table, I noticed that his wife was sitting across from us, her eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. "I've been living with my husband, Alex, in a small two-bedroom apartment above his parents' garage in Springfield for the past 5 years. We've always joked that it's like having our own private resort. We have a backyard garden, a separate entrance, and our own laundry room. My mother-in-law, Carol, would often leave homemade cookies or muffins on our doorstep, and my father-in-law, Tom, would occasionally mow our lawn for us. I've gotten used to hearing them talking from below, but it's not like we're eavesdropping. They just like to keep an ear out for us. The other day, I was going through some old family photos and stumbled upon my sister's high school yearbook. It had a weird inscription in the back. 'Congratulations on your new beginnings,' with our names scribbled in as the signers. I asked Alex about it, but he had no idea what I was talking about. He told me that his siblings have always been a bit quirky, but we've never really talked about their past antics. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but something about it still feels off. I was making breakfast in our kitchen when I noticed something weird. The local newspaper, the Springfield Star, had been left on our doorstep with the previous day's date circled. But what really caught my attention was that it wasn't just the paper. There were also 2 coupons for Linda's Gourmet Market inside, dated from last week. I've never used those coupons before, and I'm pretty sure Alex wouldn't have either. We're not big users of coupons, but we do like to support local businesses. I mentioned it to Alex while he was getting dressed, but he just shrugged and said maybe our neighbor had dropped them by mistake. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I think back, it seems like an odd coincidence. Our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, does love to read the newspaper, but she usually walks it over to us herself or leaves it on the floor by the door. This time, it was just left on the porch with no note. I made a mental note to ask Alex about it later, but my mind kept wandering back to that weird inscription in my sister's yearbook. I started keeping a list of strange occurrences around our apartment. The first entry was the newspaper with the circled date and coupons, which I had initially dismissed as a neighborly mistake. But then I noticed that the couch cushions were arranged differently than usual, and I had a vague memory of Alex rearranging them the day before. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something felt off. The next day, I received a call from a local florist, ordering a bouquet of flowers to be delivered to our address. The florist assured me that she had no record of any such order being placed, and I wondered if Alex had somehow forgotten about the flowers. I made a note to ask him about it later. As I continued to dig deeper, I started to notice small changes around the apartments. The trash cans were always emptied at the same time every week, but this time I caught a glimpse of someone quickly scooping up the contents before taking the cans out. I couldn't see who it was, but the way they moved seemed almost. I also discovered that our neighborhood association had been sending out newsletters to all residents, but the one that arrived at our doorstep was dated several weeks ago. It seemed like someone was trying to keep us in the loop about local events, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a friendly gesture. One evening, while watching TV, I overheard Carol, my mother-in-law, whispering to Tom about the plan and something about new beginnings. I tried to brush it off as a harmless conversation, but the words stuck with me. I started paying closer attention to our mail, and I noticed that all of our bills were being paid on time, with no late fees. It was almost as if someone was keeping track of our finances for us. I made a mental note to ask Alex about it, but he seemed oblivious when I brought it up. I also discovered that our favorite local restaurant, Joe's Diner, had been sending us complimentary meals, but only after Alex's name was removed from their loyalty program. It seemed like someone was trying to keep our dining habits under wraps. As I continued to investigate, I started to piece together a strange timeline of events. The old yearbook, the newspaper, the coupons, the flowers, it all seemed to point to some kind of experiment or game that my siblings were playing. But what was the goal, and who else was involved? As I scrolled through my sister's yearbook, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single random person whose name was signed to as New Beginnings had one thing in common: they all lived on the same street as our apartment building. And then I saw it. Our address, scribbled in my sister's handwriting, next to a message that made my heart skip a beat. As I stared at the yearbook page, my mind racing with questions, I noticed a faint address scribbled in the margin: 1435 Oak Street, Springfield. That was our address. I remembered the local florist's call, and how Alex seemed so oblivious to it all. But now, I realized that he wasn't just unaware, he was an active participant in this experiment. The flowers, the coupons, the bill payments, all of it was my sister's doing, orchestrated from behind the scenes. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered the way our mother-in-law Carol would sometimes glance at her phone and smile, as if receiving a text from someone. And then there were the strange conversations I overheard between Carol and Tom, the plan and new beginnings. Now I understood. They were in on it too. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that my entire life in this apartment had been a setup, a social experiment orchestrated by my siblings. But what was the goal? Why had they chosen us? And what did they hope to achieve by manipulating our lives? I looked at the message on the page again, "You're next," and felt a chill run down my spine. What did they mean? Was this some kind of twisted game, or something more sinister? I didn't have any answers, but one thing was certain: my life would never be the same. As I pieced together the evidence, I realized that my siblings had been orchestrating this social experiment for years, manipulating our lives to study human behavior in a controlled environment. I called my sister, Emily, and confronted her about it. She broke down, confessing to the entire operation. The goal was to observe how ordinary people would react when their lives were subtly manipulated. They had chosen us because of our stable and seemingly perfect family life, which they believed would provide an interesting contrast to the chaos they were creating. The authorities were called in, and my siblings were charged with invasion of privacy, identity theft, and emotional distress. They were ordered to pay restitution and undergo counseling. I moved out of the apartment, but I stayed in touch with Emily, who was genuinely remorseful for what she had done. We eventually reconciled, and I came to see her as a complex person, rather than just a villain. As I look back on the experience, I realized that it had taught me the importance of emotional boundaries and the need to question appearances. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that my life had been a small but crucial part of their experiment.